Lena adjusted her oversized sunglasses as she stepped off the school bus, the morning sun already stinging her sensitive eyes. At 12 years old, she was used to the stares. Her snow-white hair, pale skin, and pinkish eyes always drew attention, but today was different. It was the first day of 7th grade, and despite her mother's reassurances that this year will be better, her stomach twisted into knots. The whispers started before she even reached the front steps. "Look, it's Ghost Girl," someone snickered. Another voice chimed in. "Hey, Powder, you gonna melt in the sun?" Lena kept her head down, gripping the straps of her backpack tighter, wishing she could disappear. She had hoped the teasing would fade over the summer, but it was clear nothing had changed. A sudden memory flashed in her mind. Her little brother, Eli, giggling as she braided his hair last week, their mother humming in the kitchen. "You're like a fairy tale princess, Lena," Eli had said, tugging playfully at her long white braid. Her father, always her fiercest defender, had kissed her forehead before bed and whispered, "The world isn't always kind to things it doesn't understand, but that doesn't mean you're any less extraordinary." At home, she felt safe, loved. But here, under the fluorescent lights of the school hallway, she felt like a walking target. Lunchtime was the worst. The cafeteria buzzed with laughter and chatter, but Lena sat alone at the end of a table, picking at her sandwich. She could feel their eyes on her. Ava Thompson and her friends, the ringleaders of last year's torment. Ava had once accidentally knocked Lena's books into a puddle, then laughed as the ink bled across her homework. Today, though, Lena thought she might make it through unscathed, until a shadow fell over her tray. "Oops," Ava said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Then, in one swift motion, she tripped, sending her milk carton crashing onto Lena's lap. Cold liquid seeped through her skirt as the cafeteria erupted in laughter. "Guess you really are invisible now," Ava sneered, her friends cackling as they walked away. Lena's vision blurred with tears. The sticky milk clung to her skin, but the humiliation burned worse. Without a word, she bolted for the bathroom, the sound of their laughter chasing her down the hall. Locked in a stall, she pressed her forehead against the cool metal door, her breath coming in shaky gulps. "Why do I have to be different?" she thought, wiping angrily at her tears. The bell rang, but Lena didn't move. She couldn't face them again, not today. Maybe not ever. The milk incident was only the beginning. In the days that followed, Lena's life at Brookside Middle School became a minefield of whispered taunts and orchestrated humiliations. Kids who had never spoken to her before now avoided her like she carried something contagious, scrambling to switch seats when she sat nearby or dramatically wiping the desk after she used it, as if her very touch might stain them. Her glasses, thick, magnified lenses she needed to see the chalkboard, became a favorite target. One morning, she found them missing from her desk, only to spot them later perched absurdly on the head of a classroom skeleton, the frames bent out of shape from careless handling. The laughter that followed was like needles under her skin, but she forced herself to walk forward, to calmly retrieve them, to pretend her hands weren't shaking as she straightened the hinges. The teacher, Mr. Darnell, barely glanced up from his desk. "Don't leave your things lying around, Lena," was all he said, as if she'd brought it on herself. Group projects were another kind of torture. When teams were assigned, she could see the silent panic in her classmates' eyes, the way their shoulders slumped when their name was called beside hers. They never said it aloud, but their reluctance was deafening. Finished work was slid wordlessly toward her to add her part. Conversations halted when she approached, as if her presence sucked the air from the room. By the end of the first month, Lena stopped trying to contribute. She'd complete her section alone, late at night at the kitchen table, her mother rubbing her back while she scribbled answers with a dull pencil, too exhausted to care if they were right. Her grades, once solid, began to crater. Scrawled red marks littered her tests, incomplete. "See me. You can do better." But how could she explain that it wasn't the work that was hard? It was the weight of every snicker, every turn back, the way her stomach clenched the moment she stepped off the bus, bracing for whatever fresh cruelty the day would bring. The library became her refuge. It was quiet there, the lights softer, the rows of books like a shield against the world. Ms. Reed, the librarian, noticed her first as a shadow, a small, pale girl who slipped in every Tuesday and Thursday, disappearing into the farthest corner with her hood pulled up. But one afternoon, when Lena lingered too long over a display of biographies, Ms. Reed approached, not with pity, but with a question. "You like history?" she asked, and something in her tone made Lena nod instead of shrink away. That was how it started. Ms. Reed began leaving books on the corner table, stories of musicians, athletes, scientists who defied expectations. And then one day, a thin volume titled Brilliant, Lives Touched by Albinism. Lena's breath caught. She'd never seen a book about people like her before. Flipping through the pages, she stared at photos of a Nigerian dancer commanding a stage, a Paralympic sprinter mid-race, a blues guitarist with fingers flying across strings, all with skin and hair like hers. "They're out there," Ms. Reed said softly, leaning down to reshelf a nearby cart. "Changing the world, just by being in it." Lena traced the photograph of the dancer, the way her arms arched like wings, unashamed. For the first time in months, something warm flickered in her chest. The note appeared in her math notebook the next day, tucked between pages of half-finished equations. A scrap of line paper, folded so small it could have been missed entirely. "Ignore them. You're cool." No signature, but she recognized the handwriting from the boy who sat 2 rows over, Jordan, the quiet one who always doodled robots in the margins of his worksheets. He'd never spoken to her, but once, when Ava accidentally knocked her backpack into the mud, she'd seen him roll his eyes. Now, Lena pressed the note between her palms, as if holding on to it might make it real. It wasn't a solution. The taunts didn't stop. Her glasses still went missing twice that week. But that night, instead of erasing her homework until the paper tore, she taped the note inside her locker door, where no one else could see. A tiny crack of light in the dark. The photo went viral by third period. Lena didn't even see it at first. She was too busy keeping her head down as usual, shuffling through the crowded hallway with her backpack clutched to her chest like armor. But then she noticed the snickers, louder than usual, the way phones were hastily tucked away when she passed, the lingering stares that followed her with a strange, hungry curiosity. It wasn't until Jordan, of all people, intercepted her at her locker, his face unreadable as he shoved his phone toward her with a gruff, "You should know," that she understood. The screen showed a grotesquely altered version of her school photo, her skin stretched and bleached to a corpse-like pallor, her eyes glowing demonic red, jagged teeth superimposed over her smile. The caption read, "Beware the albino freak," followed by a string of crying laughing emojis. Ava's handle was tagged at the top, along with dozens of comments. "LMAO, she looks like a vampire rat." Someone called The Exorcist. "Why does she even come here?" Each one a fresh punch to the gut. Lena's vision tunneled. The noise of the hallway faded to a dull roar. For one dizzying second, she thought she might vomit right there in front of everyone. Instead, she slammed Jordan's phone back into his hands, shoved her half-emptied locker shut, and ran, past the stairs, past the muffled laughter, past the teacher who called after her in half-hearted concern. She didn't stop until she was off school grounds, her lungs burning, her cheeks wet with tears she hadn't realized were falling. She didn't go home. Her parents would ask questions, and the thought of saying it aloud, of watching their faces crumple with helpless anger, was worse than the silence of the empty park she wandered into. Instead, she curled up on a bench under the skeletal branches of an oak tree, pulling her knees to her chest. The photo burned behind her eyelids every time she blinked. It wasn't just the cruelty of it. It was the way they'd taken her face, herself, and turned it into something monstrous, something laughable. As if she wasn't a person at all. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her pocket. Her mom, probably, wondering why the school had called to report her absence. But she couldn't bring herself to answer. What would she even say? "I can't do it anymore." The truth was too heavy to voice. When the sky began to darken, she finally dragged herself home, her body leaden with exhaustion. Her parents were waiting at the kitchen table, their worry etched into the lines of their faces. Her mother reached for her the moment she stepped inside, but Lena flinched away. "I'm not going back," she whispered, her voice raw. Her father's hands clenched into fists, but his anger wasn't directed at her. "We'll call the school tomorrow," he said tightly. This harassment has gone too far. But Lena knew better. What would the school do? Give Ava a slap on the wrist detention? Force a hollow apology? It wouldn't stop the whispers, the stares, the way the entire student body had now seen her reduced to a meme. That night, she lay awake, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling, the ones her dad had helped her stick up years ago, telling her she could reach for whatever you want. Now, they just looked like taunting little eyes in the dark. 3 days passed. Lena stayed in bed, feigning illness, ignoring her mother's increasingly desperate pleas to eat something, to talk, to let them help. On the 4th morning, a knock came at the front door. Lena heard the murmur of voices, then her mother calling up the stairs, hesitant. "Lena, Ms. Reed is here to see you." For a wild moment, Lena considered pretending to be asleep. But something, maybe guilt, maybe curiosity, made her shuffle downstairs. Ms. Reed stood in the foyer, her usual stack of books absent, her expression unreadable. "Hey," she said simply, "I brought you something." She held out a battered paperback, Stargirl by Jerry Spinelli. Lena took it automatically, her fingers brushing the creased cover. "I was your age when I read this for the first time," Ms. Reed continued. "Right after a kid in my class paid everyone in the lunchroom $1 to laugh at me when I tried to give a book report." Lena blinked. Ms. Reed? Bullied. The librarian seemed so unshakable now, so comfortable in her own skin. You stuttered," Lena realized aloud, remembering the way Ms. Reed sometimes paused mid-sentence, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Ms. Reed nodded. "For years, kids called me Robot Reed because they said I sounded like a broken computer." She shrugged, but her eyes were sharp. "I used to eat lunch in the bathroom, too. Then one day, I realized I was letting them decide how much space I was allowed to take up. And that pissed me off enough to stop hiding." Lena looked down at the book in her hands, her throat tight. Ms. Reed wasn't offering empty platitudes. "It gets better. Just ignore them." She was telling her that the anger, the hurt, the exhaustion, they were all part of it. That surviving wasn't the same as surrendering. The next morning, Lena put on her darkest hoodie, the one that swallowed her whole, and let her mother drive her to school. She didn't feel brave. She didn't feel strong. But she walked through those front doors anyway, her shoulders hunched, her eyes fixed on the floor. If they wanted her to be invisible, fine. She'd vanish so completely even their cruelty couldn't find her. The science classroom hummed with the usual chaos of students shuffling into groups, but when Mr. Darnell announced their latest project, genetics and human differences, Lena felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. She braced herself for the inevitable moment when she'd be left partnerless, but then Mr. Darnell did something unexpected. He assigned groups himself, reading names off a clipboard with deliberate neutrality. "Ava, Tyler, Marcus, and Lena." The collective groan from Ava's table was loud enough to make a few kids snicker, but Mr. Darnell ignored it, leveling them with a stern look. "This is a graded collaboration. Act like it." Lena forced herself to walk over, her legs stiff with dread, and slid into the empty chair at the far end of their table. Ava glared at her like she was a foul odor ruining the air, while Tyler and Marcus exchanged smirks. "Great," Ava muttered under her breath. "We get stuck explaining why some people look like they're allergic to color." The boys snickered, but Lena's fingers tightened around her pencil. Something hot and unfamiliar flared in her chest. Not fear, not shame, but anger. The project outline stared up at her, research a genetic trait, and presented scientific and social implications. For once, she actually knew something they didn't. When Mr. Darnell called for topic proposals, Ava breezily suggested eye color, but Lena didn't raise her hand for permission to speak. She just said it, her voice clear and steady. "We should do albinism." The room went quiet. Ava's head whipped toward her, eyes narrowed, but Lena didn't back down. "It's a genetic condition affecting melanin production," she continued, as if reciting from one of Ms. Reed's books. "It's why my skin and hair look like this. It also causes vision problems. That's why I wear these." She tapped her glasses, and for the first time, it didn't feel like an apology. Marcus opened his mouth, probably to make some crack about her being a vampire, but Mr. Darnell cut in, intrigued. "That's a strong choice, Lena. Plenty of scientific depth, plus real-world relevance." Ava's jaw clenched, but she couldn't argue without looking petty. The victory was small, but it sent a rush through Lena's veins. She'd spoken up, and for once, someone had listened. Later, As the group half-heartedly divided research tasks, Ava, of course, claimed presentation design to avoid actual work. Tyler muttered something under his breath. Still creepy, no matter how you spin it. Lena froze, but before she could shrink back, Jordan, who was passing their table to sharpen his pencil, stopped mid-step. "Dude, shut up," he said, loud enough for the whole class to hear. "You're just mad she's smarter than you." The room went dead silent. Tyler turned red. Ava looked like she'd been slapped. Even Mr. Darnell paused, eyebrows raised. Jordan didn't wait for a response. He just walked back to his seat, leaving Lena staring after him, her face warm with something she couldn't name. That afternoon, the school intercom crackled with an announcement. The annual talent show sign-ups were open. Lena's stomach flipped. She hadn't sung in front of anyone since elementary school, back when kids still thought her voice was pretty before they decided everything about her was weird. But as she packed her bag, Jordan appeared beside her locker, uncharacteristically earnest. "You should do it," he said, like he'd read her mind. "I heard you humming in the library once. You're good." Lena's pulse thudded in her ears. The idea of standing on that stage, under those lights, felt terrifying, but for the first time in months, the fear was edged with something else. Possibility. The auditorium lights burned hotter than Lena expected, a blinding white that made her squint as she stepped onto the stage, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The whispers started instantly, giggles from Ava's usual crowd, a few scattered. "Oh my gods," as if her mere presence was a punchline. Her hands trembled around the microphone, her mouth suddenly dry as paper. For one paralyzing second, she thought about bolting, just dropping the mic and running into the wings. But then she caught sight of Jordan in the front row, giving her a thumbs up, and Ms. Reed standing by the sound booth with a small, steadying nod. The opening notes of This Is Me began to play, the familiar melody wrapping around her like armor. Lena closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and let the words come. At first, her voice was barely a whisper, thin and unsteady, but as the chorus built, something inside her cracked open. She sang louder, pouring every ounce of the past month's pain into the lyrics. "I am brave, I am bruised. I am who I'm meant to be, this is me." Her voice swelling with a strength that surprised even her. The crowd's murmurs died. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Ava slump in her seat, arms crossed, while other students leaned forward, some even mouthing the words along with her. By the final verse, Lena wasn't just singing, she was declaring, her arms outstretched, her face tipped toward the lights. The moment the last note faded, the room erupted, not in laughter, but in applause so thunderous it vibrated in her chest. A few kids even stood, whistling and cheering. Lena's knees nearly gave out. She hadn't just survived the spotlight, she'd owned it. Afterward, the hallways felt different. Kids who'd never glanced her way now smiled or muttered, "That was awesome," as she passed. The photoshopped image of her, the one that had haunted her for weeks, mysteriously vanished from social media by the next morning. Ava avoided her entirely, her usual sneer replaced by tight-lipped silence, as if Lena had become something she couldn't touch. But the real change came when Jordan cornered her at lunch, sliding into the seat across from her with a grin. "So," he said, "we're starting a club, right?" Ms. Reed had already approved it, Shine Together, a place for kids who'd ever felt like they didn't belong. Their first meeting drew a handful of students, a boy with a stutter, a girl in a wheelchair, a transfer student who barely spoke English. Lena stood at the front of the room, her voice no longer shaking. "This is for anyone who's ever been told they're too different," she said, and the way they looked at her, not with pity, but with hope, made her stand taller. That night, as she lay in bed, Lena replayed the moment on stage, the lights, the music, the roar of the crowd. For so long, she tried to fold herself into shadows, to take up as little space as possible. But now, the memory of her own voice, loud and unafraid, thrummed through her like a second heartbeat. For the first time, Lena didn't just stand in the light, she became it.